The first arrow struck the frozen earth with a sound sharp enough to split the silence. A spray of dirt burst against the hem of the young woman's worn grey dress, staining cloth that had already been darkened by mud, pine needles, and dried herbs gathered before dawn. Yet she did not flinch. She did not run. She simply lowered herself farther over the 3 trembling wolf cubs curled beneath her body. Above her, the sky had vanished. Thousands of black arrows poured through the smoke like a deadly rainstorm, blotting out the pale morning sun. Beyond the chaos, somewhere behind shattered wagons and burning banners, the wounded Alpha King still fought alone. His roar echoed across the valley like thunder trapped inside the mountains. No warrior could understand why an Omega girl, small, gentle, and carrying no weapon, had chosen certain death to protect children that were not her own. No soldier could explain why the royal cubs refused to leave her side. And before the morning sun climbed over the snowy peaks, one forgotten promise, one ancient bond, and one simple act of kindness would change the fate of Frostmere forever. Long before blood stained the snow beneath Black Fang Ridge, the Kingdom of Frostmere had been known for something far more beautiful than war. Travelers crossed frozen rivers just to glimpse the northern mountains glowing beneath winter sunlight. Merchants filled the castle markets with woven wool, mountain honey, smoked trout, and polished amber gathered from ancient forests. Every spring, children tied ribbons around the oldest pine trees while elders sang songs older than the kingdom itself. Those songs always ended the same way. They spoke of wolves. Not beasts. Not monsters. Guardians. Generations ago, before stone castles crowned the hills and royal banners waved above their towers, the first king of Frostmere had wandered into the northern wilderness after losing everything to famine and war. Starving, freezing, and nearly dead, he had collapsed beneath an ancient cedar where a massive silver wolf discovered him. The wolf could have ended his life with a single bite. Instead, it stayed. For 3 days, it guarded the helpless stranger from storms and hungry predators until hunters finally found him. That kindness became the beginning of a promise. The king vowed that neither his descendants nor their people would ever hunt the wolves of the northern mountains. In return, the wolves protected Frostmere whenever darkness threatened its borders. The kingdom prospered. Children grew beside wolf pups. Royal heirs earned their crowns only after standing beneath the moon beside the Alpha King. The bond between humans and wolves became stronger than iron. But promises made by grateful hearts often fade beneath the weight of greed. Years passed. Kings changed. Councils changed. Men who had never known hunger began whispering about power instead of gratitude. Then someone discovered a secret hidden inside the oldest royal records. The blood of an Alpha King carried an ancient strength. Not magic that could throw fire or summon storms. Something older. Something quieter. Its strength gave courage where fear should have lived. It healed wounds that should never have closed. It inspired wolves to follow without command. Soon those whispers became obsession. Some nobles no longer saw the wolves as protectors. They saw them as treasures waiting to be captured. The first traps appeared deep inside the northern forests. Then poisoned meat. Then hunters who claimed they had only been defending themselves. Each lie cut another thread from a bond that had taken centuries to weave. The wolves slowly disappeared into higher mountains. The old songs were sung less often. Children who once laughed beside wolf pups now listened to frightening stories told by frightened adults. Only a few still remembered the truth. Far from the royal castle, where politics never reached and crowns held little meaning, a small stone cottage rested beside the whispering pines. Its roof leaned beneath heavy moss. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the wooden porch. A narrow stream carried clear mountain water past smooth grey stones before disappearing into the forest. Smoke drifted lazily from a crooked chimney every morning before sunrise. That cottage belonged to Elian. She had no servants. No noble blood. No expensive clothes. Most days, she wore the same simple wool dress beneath a weathered green cloak stitched by her late mother many winters before. People called her an Omega with quiet pity. Some called her weak. Others barely noticed her at all. None of those things mattered to Elian. She measured people differently. Not by titles. Not by strength. But by the kindness they offered when no reward waited at the end. Each morning began the same way. Before the village bell rang, she stepped outside carrying a woven basket across one shoulder. The cold greeted her first. It slipped beneath her sleeves until her fingertips tingled. She smiled anyway. The forest always felt alive before the rest of the world awakened. Mist floated above the stream. Birdsong drifted between towering pines. Somewhere deeper inside the woods, deer crossed frozen paths so softly they hardly disturbed the snow. Elian knew every trail, every berry bush, every patch of healing moss growing beneath shaded rocks. She spoke little while gathering herbs, yet she was never truly alone. A red squirrel often followed her from tree to tree, chattering impatiently whenever she paused too long. Bluebirds landed near her boots without fear. Even nervous rabbits seemed strangely comfortable grazing only a few steps away. The villagers laughed about it. "The animals think she's one of them," an old baker once joked. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps they simply recognized something many humans no longer could. Gentleness. That morning, Elian knelt beside a fallen cedar where silverleaf herbs pushed through melting frost. She carefully loosened each stem without damaging its roots. "Grow again," she whispered softly as she covered the soil. A faint rustle came from nearby bushes. Instead of reaching for a weapon, she turned slowly. A young fox stood watching her. Its front paw hovered awkwardly above the ground. The animal neither growled nor fled. Elian remained perfectly still. After several quiet moments, the fox limped closer. A cruel iron snare clung tightly around its leg. The frightened creature trembled so violently its breath became visible in the cold air. "Oh!" Her voice barely rose above the whispering wind. "Who did this to you?" She slowly untied the leather cord around her herb basket. Every movement remained calm, patient. The fox watched her with frightened golden eyes but never attempted to bite. Snowflakes drifted quietly between them. When she finally reached the trap, her fingers were already numb from the freezing metal. The mechanism snapped open with a harsh click. The fox jerked backward. For one heartbeat, it simply stared. Then it lowered its head. Not much. Only enough for its nose to brush gently against the back of her hand. A silent thank you. Moments later, it disappeared among the pines. Elian smiled to herself. "Take care." She continued gathering herbs, unaware that someone else had been watching from farther up the ridge. Old Bram, the village woodcutter, leaned against his axe with worried eyes. When she returned toward the village near midday, he stepped into the path. "You shouldn't wander so deep anymore." She looked up. "What happened?" He rubbed his grey beard uneasily. "The mountains have gone quiet." She glanced toward the northern peaks rising beyond the forest. "They're always quiet." "No." His voice lowered. "Not like this." The old man listened for something only years of living beside the wilderness had taught him to hear. "There are no ravens." Elian looked upward. The branches swayed gently. No dark wings crossed the pale sky. No familiar cries echoed above the trees. Only silence. A silence so complete it pressed against her ears. She frowned. "I hadn't noticed." "I have." Bram tightened his grip on the axe. "And I don't like it." Before she could answer, a flock of tiny mountain birds suddenly burst from the northern forest. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. They filled the sky in a frantic cloud, flying south so quickly that feathers drifted through the air behind them. Every animal nearby froze. The squirrels stopped moving. The deer lifted their heads. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then came the howl. Long, deep, filled with something far heavier than anger. It rolled across the mountains until every pine tree seemed to tremble beneath its weight. Another answered. Then another. Not one voice. Many. The sound wrapped around the valley before slowly fading into silence once more. Old Bram's face turned pale. "That's no hunting call." Elian felt the hair rise along her arms. "What is it?" The old woodcutter looked toward the distant cliffs where dark smoke had begun climbing into the sky. His answer barely escaped his lips. "A warning." Elian followed his gaze. Beyond the endless sea of trees. Past frozen rivers. Far beneath the towering northern peaks. A thin column of black smoke twisted upward like a scar across the morning sky. Then another appeared. And another. The smell reached them moments later. Not pine. Not cedar. Burning wood. Burning leather. Burning homes. Her basket slipped from her fingers, scattering fresh herbs across the snow. Without another word, she pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders and began running toward the mountains, never imagining that before the day ended, she would find 3 frightened wolf cubs hiding beneath broken trees, and unknowingly place herself between them and an entire army. The climb toward the northern cliffs grew steeper with every passing minute. Snow crunched beneath Elian's worn boots as she hurried through narrow mountain trails where twisted pine roots clawed across the frozen ground. The basket she had dropped in the village no longer mattered. Every instinct urged her to turn back, to find safety before whatever horror had driven the birds from the forest reached these woods. But another feeling pulled even harder. Someone needed help. The smoke thickened until it stung her eyes. The sharp scent of burning pine mixed with iron, and before long another smell drifted through the cold wind. Blood. Fresh. Far too much of it. She slowed her pace. The forest no longer sang. No birds. No insects. No distant streams. Only the restless whisper of snow blowing through the branches. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. A broken wagon lay half buried beneath drifting snow. One wheel still turned slowly in the wind. Nearby, a shattered shield carried the silver crest of Frostmere's royal guard. Elian knelt beside it. Fresh scratches covered the polished metal as though enormous claws had scraped across its surface. Not the marks of anger. The marks of desperation. She touched the edge of the shield with trembling fingers. The battle had happened only moments ago. Another sound drifted through the forest. Not shouting. Not steel. A tiny cry. Soft. Weak. Almost hidden beneath the wind. She turned immediately. There. The sound came again. A frightened whimper. Elian followed it between broken trees until she reached a cluster of uprooted pines scattered across a narrow hollow. Snow covered everything except one small space beneath a fallen trunk. 3 pairs of golden eyes stared back at her. Wolf cubs. Tiny. No larger than village dogs. One had snowy white fur with silver ears. Another was charcoal grey with a pale stripe across its forehead. The smallest, still clumsy on oversized paws, pressed tightly against its brother as though trying to disappear. They did not growl. They only watched. Fear filled their bright eyes. Their soft coats were stained with ash. One tiny paw bled where splintered wood had torn the skin. Elian remained perfectly still. Her heartbeat echoed inside her chest. These were no ordinary wolves. Around each tiny neck rested a narrow leather band woven with silver thread. Royal markings. The realization stole her breath. The Alpha King's children. She had heard stories. Everyone in Frostmere had. The royal wolf cubs rarely left the northern mountains, guarded day and night by warriors sworn to protect them with their lives. If these cubs were here alone, something terrible had happened. The smallest cub whimpered again. Its tiny body shook violently. Without thinking, Elian slowly lowered herself onto one knee. "It is all right." Her voice barely disturbed the silence. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cubs remained frozen. She carefully removed her thick wool gloves and placed them on the snow between them. Then she waited. The cold bit into her fingers. Minutes seemed to pass. Finally, the white cub took one uncertain step forward. Its little nose twitched. It sniffed the gloves. Then it sniffed her hand. Elian did not move. The tiny wolf lifted one injured paw. A thin line of blood stained the snow beneath it. "Oh!" Her heart ached. "You poor little thing." Slowly, almost unbelievably, the cub leaned against her fingertips. Not because it trusted her completely. Because it was exhausted. The other 2 soon followed. One rested against her knee. The smallest buried its face beneath her cloak as though searching for warmth. Elian's eyes filled with tears. Children. No matter what shape they wore. They were only children. She gently wrapped the smallest paw with a strip torn from the edge of her sleeve. "There." A faint breeze brushed through the clearing. The cub closed its eyes for just a moment. Then its ears suddenly stood upright. Every cub lifted its head at once. Listening. Far away. A horn sounded. Once. Then twice. The wolves instantly shrank against Elian. Another sound followed. Heavy footsteps. Many of them. Branches snapped somewhere beyond the ridge. Men. Elian quickly gathered the cubs beneath her cloak. Quiet. The word escaped as barely more than a breath. She slipped behind the fallen pine just as armored soldiers emerged onto the trail above. Their armor bore Frostmere's colors. Yet something felt terribly wrong. The silver wolf emblem had been scratched away from every shield. One soldier carried a blood-stained banner rolled beneath his arm. Another laughed while wiping crimson from his sword. They can't have gone far. The commander wants every last one. Especially the cubs. We bring them back alive if possible. And if not? The oldest soldier smiled without warmth. Dead wolves are still worth a fortune. Elian's stomach tightened. These were not rescuers. These were hunters. The soldiers spread through the trees. Boots crushed frozen branches only yards away. One stopped beside the fallen pine. His shadow stretched across the snow. Elian held her breath. Beneath her cloak, the smallest cub trembled so violently she feared the movement alone would reveal them. The soldier frowned. "Did you hear something?" Another answered from farther away. "Only the wind." He looked down one final time. Then walked on. Only after their footsteps disappeared did Elian allow herself to breathe again. She remained hidden for several long minutes. Finally, silence returned. She carefully lifted the cubs. "We have to leave." The white cub looked into her eyes as though it understood every word. She tucked all three safely inside her heavy cloak, fastening it tightly enough to keep them warm without hurting them. Tiny noses peeked through the folds of wool. Their frightened breaths warmed her neck. The mountain paths she normally traveled would no longer be safe. Fortunately, there were older trails. Hidden ones. As a child, her mother had shown her narrow passages used by herbalists long before roads reached these mountains. Most people had forgotten they existed. Nature had hidden them beneath moss and fallen branches. Elian hurried toward one such trail, weaving between towering cliffs where frozen waterfalls shimmered like glass. The cubs remained strangely quiet. Almost as though they knew silence meant survival. Hours passed. The climb became harder. The wind stronger. Snow swirled through narrow mountain passes, erasing her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. Several times she paused to let the cubs drink from melted snow collected inside smooth stones. The smallest repeatedly nudged her hand before drinking itself. Each gentle touch somehow strengthened her tired legs. Then, filled with pain, every cub immediately lifted its head. Their tiny ears pointed toward the valley ahead. Another roar answered. Then steel clashed against steel. Elian carefully climbed the final ridge. Below her, the mountain opened into a vast frozen valley. Smoke drifted across shattered wagons. Broken spears stood like dead trees buried in the snow. Bodies of soldiers lay scattered across the battlefield. Some wore Frostmere's colors. Others wore no crest at all. Near the center of the valley, one enormous black wolf stood surrounded. His fur, dark as midnight, was soaked with blood. A broken spear remained lodged near one shoulder. Fresh wounds crossed his powerful body. His breathing came hard. Yet his golden eyes still burned with unshaken determination. Around him lay dozens of fallen enemies. No ordinary wolf could have survived such a battle. No ordinary creature could command such presence. Every surviving soldier kept their distance despite outnumbering him. Fear lived behind their helmets. The Alpha King. Even wounded. Even alone. He remained terrifying. Elian watched as another wave of armored hunters rushed forward. The Alpha King lunged. His massive body moved with astonishing speed despite exhaustion. One warrior flew backward as though struck by a falling tree. Another lost his sword before he even realized the wolf had reached him. The valley echoed with cries. Still, more soldiers advanced. They did not fight with courage. They fought with numbers. Every minute stole another piece of the Alpha King's strength. His movements slowed. Blood darkened the snow beneath him. Then Elian noticed something else. The great wolf wasn't trying to escape. Again and again he forced himself between the soldiers and the narrow mountain path where she now stood hidden with his cubs. He wasn't defending land. He was protecting the only road leading to his children. A sudden shout rose from below. "There!" An archer standing atop a broken cart pointed directly toward the ridge. "The cubs!" Dozens of heads turned at once. The Alpha King's eyes followed. Across the smoke. Across the battlefield. His golden gaze met Elian's. For one suspended heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The roar of battle. The screaming men. The crackling fires. Only two strangers looked at one another. A wounded king. And an unknown Omega carrying the future of his bloodline. The Alpha King's expression changed. Not fear for himself. Fear for them. He tried to charge forward. 3 soldiers blocked his path. Chains wrapped around one of his hind legs. Another spear struck his side. He stumbled. The enemy commander raised his hand. "Archers!" Rows of bowstrings tightened. Every arrow turned toward the ridge. Toward Elian. Toward the tiny cubs hidden beneath her cloak. The commander lowered his hand. "Fire!" The sky disappeared beneath a storm of black arrows. And in that single terrifying heartbeat, every instinct inside Elian begged her to run. Instead, she dropped to her knees, curled her body over the 3 trembling cubs, wrapped both arms around them, and refused to move. The first arrow struck the frozen earth only inches away. The first arrow buried itself in the frozen earth so close to Elian that snow and dirt burst across her face. Another struck the fallen log beside her shoulder with a sharp crack, splintering the ancient wood. Fragments of bark rained across her cloak. Then another. And another. Within moments, the quiet mountain ridge vanished beneath a storm of iron. The air screamed. Hundreds of arrows tore through the sky with a sound like winter wind forcing its way through narrow canyon walls. Elian closed her eyes. Not because she wished to escape the moment. Because she had only one thought left. Protect them. Her body curved tighter around the 3 tiny cubs. She tucked their frightened faces against her chest and lowered her head until her hair covered them like another blanket. The smallest cub buried its nose beneath her arm. Its little heartbeat raced so quickly she could feel every frightened beat through the layers of cloth. "I'm here," she whispered. The words almost disappeared beneath the roar of falling arrows. "You are not alone." Iron slammed into the ground all around her. Some pierced the snow so deeply that only their feathered ends remained visible. Others shattered against stone, sending sharp fragments through the air. One arrow tore across her shoulder. Pain burned through her arm like fire. She gasped but never lifted herself. Another sliced the side of her cloak before disappearing into the frozen ground. The cubs whimpered. She wrapped herself around them even tighter. Far below, the Alpha King saw everything. For one terrible heartbeat, he forgot the soldiers surrounding him. Forgot the blood soaking his black fur. Forgot the spear buried near his shoulder. His children. Hidden beneath the body of a stranger. A stranger who had every reason to flee. Yet she remained. The Alpha King's roar shook the valley. It was no ordinary cry. It carried grief, rage, and something that had almost vanished from his heart after years of betrayal. Hope. The soldiers nearest him instinctively stepped backward. Even the horses panicked, pulling wildly against broken harnesses. "Hold him," the commander shouted. "Do not let the beast reach them." Heavy chains flew through the air. 2 wrapped around the Alpha King's hind legs. Another tightened across his chest. Half a dozen armored hunters pulled with all their strength. The enormous wolf staggered. For a brief moment, it seemed the chains might hold. Then muscles rolled beneath his dark coat. With one violent surge, iron links snapped apart. The sound echoed like thunder striking stone. Several soldiers crashed into the snow as broken chains whipped through the air. The Alpha King charged. His paws struck the frozen ground with enough force to scatter loose snow behind him. Every leap carried him closer to the ridge. Closer to his children. Closer to the Omega shielding them with her own life. Archers quickly shifted their aim. Again, the commander roared. Loose another volley. Bowstrings tightened once more. The Alpha King lunged through the chaos, throwing one hunter aside before another spear scraped across his ribs. Blood followed every step now. His strength was fading. Yet he never slowed. On the ridge, Elian finally dared to lift her head. Silence. Not complete silence. The arrows had stopped. The valley remained filled with smoke, distant cries, and the crackle of burning wagons, but the deadly rain had ended. She slowly opened her eyes. The snow around her looked like a frozen field of black reeds. Hundreds of arrows surrounded her from every direction. Some stood only inches away. Others had pierced the folds of her cloak without touching her skin. It felt impossible. Almost as though fate itself had drawn invisible lines around the place where the cubs lay hidden. The white cub cautiously peeked from beneath her arm. Its tiny nose brushed her cheek. Alive. All three were alive. Relief washed through Elian so suddenly that her body trembled harder than it had during the attack. But there was no time to rest. A new sound climbed the ridge. Boots. Many boots. The enemy commander had abandoned caution. If arrows had failed, his soldiers would finish the task themselves. Elian carefully stood despite the pain spreading through her wounded shoulder. Warm blood soaked the torn sleeve of her dress. Her knees nearly gave way beneath her. Still, she tightened the cloak around the cubs. We have to keep moving. She managed only 3 steps before armed men emerged from the smoke. 10. No. Nearly 20 soldiers spread across the hillside, slowly surrounding her. Their armor bore no royal crest now. Only plain black cloaks covered polished steel. The commander climbed behind them. He was taller than most men, broad-shouldered, with silver threaded through his dark beard. One long scar crossed his face from temple to jaw. His eyes held no anger. Only cold calculation. He studied Elian quietly. So. His voice carried easily through the frozen air. The little healer everyone ignored. Elian remained silent. You surprise me. His gaze shifted toward the moving bundle beneath her cloak. The Alpha King's cubs have chosen interesting company. The smallest wolf growled. It was barely louder than a frightened puppy. Several soldiers laughed. The commander's smile never reached his eyes. Hand them over. Elian slowly stepped backward. No. One simple word. Barely louder than the wind. Yet every soldier heard it. The commander sighed. I was hoping you would be wiser. They're only children. There is. His tone hardened. As long as they live, someone will rally behind them. They've done nothing wrong. They were born. He shrugged as though that alone explained everything. Sometimes that's enough. Elian's fingers tightened around the cloak. You'll have to kill me first. For the first time, genuine curiosity crossed the commander's face. He studied the young Omega more carefully. Simple clothes. No sword. No armor. No rank. Nothing that explained such courage. Why? She looked down at the tiny faces hidden beneath her cloak. The white cub leaned gently against her arm. The grey one watched every soldier without blinking. The smallest trembled but refused to hide. Elian answered without lifting her eyes. Because no child should die for another person's hunger. The valley fell strangely quiet. Even some soldiers shifted uneasily. The commander gave a slow nod. A beautiful answer. His expression hardened again. It changes nothing. He raised one hand. Take her alive. The soldiers advanced. Before the first reached her, a howl split the mountains. Long, deep, ancient. Every man froze. Another answered from somewhere high above the cliffs. Then another. And another. The echoes rolled across the valleys until the mountains themselves seemed alive. Snow drifted from towering pines. Loose ice cracked along distant cliffs. The commander slowly turned. What was that? No one answered. Mist began flowing between the trees. Not thick enough to hide the forest. Just enough to soften every shadow. Inside that silver mist, shapes moved. Silent. Graceful. One grey wolf stepped from behind an ancient cedar. Its winter coat shimmered beneath the pale sunlight. Then another appeared beside it. Then 3 more. Soon dozens of wolves surrounded the clearing. None bared their teeth. None attacked. They simply stood, watching. Their amber and silver eyes rested on only one person. Elian. She stared back in disbelief. The white cub suddenly slipped free from her cloak. Before she could stop it, the tiny wolf trotted several steps into the snow. The surrounding wolves lowered their heads together. Not to the cub. To her. A shiver passed through every soldier. One whispered nervously, "I've never seen them do that." Neither had the Alpha King. He had finally reached the edge of the clearing, blood dripping steadily from countless wounds. Breathing heavily, he stopped the instant he saw the wolves. They had gathered from every corner of the northern mountains. Old hunters, young scouts, mothers with half-grown pups, even scarred elders rarely seen outside sacred valleys. Never, not once in living memory, had the mountain packs assembled without the Alpha King's command. Yet today, they had answered someone else's heart. The old stories returned to him with startling clarity. Stories his grandfather had spoken beside winter fires. Of a day when the wolves would recognize not the strongest soul, but the kindest. Not a ruler wearing a crown, but a guardian willing to give everything for another life. The promise of mercy. He had dismissed it as legend. Now, he watched it unfold before his own eyes. The commander laughed. The sound rang hollow against the silent mountains. "So this is your miracle." He drew his sword. "They're only animals." He pointed the blade directly toward Elian. "Kill the girl." No soldier moved. Not one. Their eyes remained fixed on the countless wolves surrounding them. Fear crept into faces that moments earlier had worn confidence. The commander's voice rose. "Did you not hear me?" Still, no one obeyed. A cold wind swept through the clearing. Snowflakes drifted between wolves and humans alike. The Alpha King stepped forward. His massive frame, battered and bleeding, still carried the quiet authority of generations. He did not growl. He did not charge. He simply stood beside Elian. For the first time since the battle began, she was no longer standing alone. The commander narrowed his eyes. His grip tightened around his sword. Then, with a cruel smile that chilled even his own soldiers, he slowly raised his hand toward the archers gathering behind the trees. "If fear has stolen your courage," he said quietly, "then let iron remind the mountains who truly rules them." Dozens of bowstrings were drawn once again. And this time, every arrow was aimed not only at Elian, but at every wolf that had come to answer an ancient promise. The first bowstring had barely tightened when the mountain answered. A low rumble rolled beneath the frozen ground. It was so gentle at first that the soldiers looked toward the clouds, expecting thunder. Yet the sky remained pale, and the winter wind carried nothing except drifting snow and the scent of pine. The sound came again. Deeper. Closer. Loose stones danced across the hillside. Thin sheets of ice cracked along the cliffs. Every wolf lifted its head at the same moment. Not in fear. In recognition. The commander frowned. "What is happening?" Before anyone could answer, an elderly grey wolf stepped forward from the gathering pack. Age had whitened the fur around his muzzle, and old scars crossed one cloudy eye, yet he walked with quiet dignity. The younger wolves instinctively lowered their heads as he passed. Even the Alpha King bowed his great head. The commander noticed. "So," he muttered, "the old beast still lives." The elder wolf ignored the soldiers completely. Instead, he approached Elian. She remained perfectly still despite the arrows still pointed toward her. The ancient wolf stopped only a single step away. His breathing was slow, calm. For several heartbeats, he simply studied her face. Then, with incredible gentleness, he lowered his great head until his nose touched the bandaged hand that had freed the young fox earlier that morning. A warm breath washed across her frozen fingers. The old wolf closed his eyes. Around them, every wolf in the valley did the same. Hundreds of heads bowed together. The silence that followed carried more power than any roar. Even the soldiers felt it. One whispered nervously, They're honoring her. Another swallowed hard. I've never seen wolves bow to anyone except the Alpha King. The commander slammed the end of his sword into the frozen earth. Enough. His voice shattered the stillness. They're animals. He turned toward the archers. Fire! No arrows flew. The men holding the bows stared at the wolves surrounding them. Their hands shook. One slowly lowered his weapon. Another stepped backward. The commander strode toward the nearest archer and struck him across the face with the flat of his blade. Cowards! The soldier dropped to one knee, blood running from his lip, but he still did not raise his bow. The commander looked around at the frightened faces. His army had marched into the mountains believing they were hunting beasts. Instead, they stood inside something they could neither understand nor control. His jaw tightened. If you won't obey. He reached for a bow himself. With practiced speed, he drew an arrow and aimed directly at the smallest cub peeking from beneath Elian's cloak. The valley seemed to stop breathing. Elian instinctively stepped in front of the cub. The Alpha King lunged forward despite his wounds. The elder wolf lifted his head. The commander smiled. Then a sharp cry echoed from high above. A golden eagle swept down from the cliffs. Its enormous wings caught the winter wind as it dove toward the commander with astonishing speed. Startled, he released the bowstring too soon. The arrow flew wildly into the sky before disappearing beyond the ridge. The eagle climbed again, circling above the battlefield. The commander cursed beneath his breath. His moment had vanished. The wolves moved first. Not to attack. To protect. Without a single growl or command, they quietly formed a living circle around Elian, the cubs, and the wounded Alpha King. Grey fur blended with falling snow until the line seemed almost part of the mountain itself. The soldiers hesitated. Crossing that wall no longer felt like entering a battle. It felt like stepping into sacred ground. The elder wolf looked once toward the Alpha King. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. None were needed. The Alpha King slowly approached Elian. Up close, he appeared even larger than she had imagined. His black coat was soaked with blood. Deep cuts crossed his shoulders. The broken spear still remained lodged beneath layers of thick fur. Each breath came with visible effort. Yet despite all that strength, he lowered his head before her. Not in surrender. In gratitude. Elian's eyes widened. You shouldn't. Her voice trembled. You need help. The Alpha King remained still. The white cub trotted happily toward him, pressing its tiny head beneath his father's chin. The great wolf closed his eyes for a brief moment. A father's relief softened the fierce lines of his face. The other two cubs quickly joined him, climbing clumsily over his massive paws. Watching them together, Elian felt tears gather in her eyes. For the first time since reaching the battlefield. The children looked safe. The peace lasted only a heartbeat. Far below, a hunting horn echoed through the valley. Then another answered from the southern road. Fresh troops. The commander's smile slowly returned. You think you've won. He laughed quietly. You've only delayed the inevitable. One of his scouts ran up the slope, breathing hard. My lord. What is it? The 2nd Battalion has crossed the river. And? They'll reach the valley before sunset. The commander's eyes gleamed. Excellent. He looked toward the Alpha King. You escaped one trap. His gaze shifted toward Elian. But the mountains cannot hide you forever. He climbed onto his horse. Before leaving, he looked once more at the wolves surrounding the Omega. Enjoy your little miracle. His smile carried no warmth. When the kingdom hears that wolves have kidnapped an innocent girl and murdered the king's loyal soldiers. He let the words linger. They'll hunt every last one of you. With a sharp pull on the reins, he turned his horse. The remaining soldiers followed. None looked relieved. Many glanced back over their shoulders, their expressions troubled by what they had witnessed. When the last echo of hooves faded into the snowy distance, the valley became quiet once more. Only then did the Alpha King's legs begin to shake. He had pushed his wounded body beyond its limits. Blood dripped steadily into the snow. Without warning, The mighty wolf stumbled. Elian rushed forward just before he collapsed. His enormous weight struck the ground with a heavy thud that sent loose snow into the air. She knelt beside him immediately. The spear. It had broken during the battle, leaving the jagged shaft buried deep beneath his shoulder. She looked toward the elder wolf. I have to remove it. The old wolf remained beside the Alpha King's head. His steady gaze never left Elian. It was permission. She tore clean strips from the inside of her cloak. Gathering handfuls of snow, she gently washed the blood away until the wound became visible. The spear had gone deeper than she feared. If I pull it too quickly. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. He may not survive. The Alpha King opened one golden eye. Pain clouded it. Yet he did not pull away. Slowly, Elian placed one hand against his thick neck. Her fingers disappeared into warm black fur. It's going to hurt. He remained perfectly still. She took a long breath, then gripped the broken shaft. With one steady movement, she drew the spear free. A deep growl escaped the Alpha King's throat. Fresh blood spilled across the snow. The cubs cried out together. Elian immediately pressed clean moss against the wound, followed by crushed silverleaf herbs from the small pouch still hanging at her belt. The scent of pine and healing herbs filled the cold air. She wrapped the wound tightly with long strips of cloth. Minute after minute, she worked without resting. Her fingers turned red from the freezing wind. Her own injured shoulder bled unnoticed beneath her torn sleeve. She never stopped. At last, the flow of blood slowed. The Alpha King's breathing steadied. The elder wolf gently touched Elian's shoulder with his nose. A quiet thank you. As the afternoon light softened into gold, the wolves began moving toward a narrow passage hidden behind towering cliffs. The elder wolf looked back once, then continued walking. The Alpha King slowly struggled to his feet. Though weak, he managed a few careful steps before turning toward Elian. He waited. She looked at the disappearing wolves, then toward the distant smoke rising above Frostmere. Behind those walls, the commander would already be spreading his lies. The kingdom believed its king was dying. By nightfall, it might believe he was already dead. Elian drew a slow breath and adjusted the frightened cubs beneath her cloak. Then she stepped beside the Alpha King. Together, they followed the ancient wolves into a hidden path no ordinary traveler had seen for generations. The narrow trail wound deep into the heart of the northern mountains, where forgotten secrets slept beneath crystal stone, and where the true story of the bond between wolves and humans had been waiting for someone worthy enough to hear it. The hidden mountain path twisted through towering cliffs where sunlight rarely reached. Ancient pines clung to the stone walls, their roots buried deep inside cracks carved by countless winters. Thick blankets of snow rested upon their branches, untouched by footprints. It felt as though no human had walked this trail for centuries. Elian followed in silence. The three cubs padded close behind her, no longer trembling as they had on the battlefield. Every few moments, the smallest hurried forward to brush against the hem of her cloak before trotting back to its brothers, as if making certain she had not disappeared. Behind them came the Alpha King. His pace was slow. Each step carried the weight of fresh wounds. The bandages around his shoulder had already begun to stain red once again, yet he refused to stop. The elder wolf occasionally glanced back toward him, his wise eyes filled with quiet concern. Night arrived long before they reached their destination. The mountain swallowed the last golden light, replacing it with silver moonlight that shimmered across untouched snow. Cold wind drifted through the narrow pass. Somewhere overhead, an owl called once before disappearing into the darkness. Then the cliffs opened. Elian stopped without realizing it. Before her stood an enormous cave unlike anything she had ever imagined. Its entrance rose higher than the tallest watchtower in Frostmere. Thousands of pale crystals covered the stone ceiling, catching the moonlight and scattering it across the cavern like countless tiny stars. A narrow stream flowed through the center, its water so clear that every stone beneath its surface seemed carved from glass. The air smelled clean, fresh, untouched by smoke or war. The wolves entered quietly. Not one voice disturbed the peaceful silence. It did not feel like entering a cave. It felt like stepping into a forgotten temple. The elder wolf led them toward the center where a wide circle had been carved into the stone floor. Unlike the rough mountain walls surrounding it, this circle had been shaped by careful hands many generations ago. Strange markings covered its surface. Trees, mountains, running wolves, human hands reaching toward animal paws. Elian knelt beside the carvings. Her fingertips brushed across the smooth stone. "They're beautiful." A soft voice answered from behind her. "They tell our beginning." She spun around. Standing near the entrance was an elderly man wrapped in a thick white cloak trimmed with wolf fur. His long silver hair rested across his shoulders, and a carved wooden staff supported his slow steps. One large grey wolf walked calmly beside him. The elder wolf lowered his head respectfully. So did the Alpha King. The old man smiled gently. "It has been many years since these halls welcomed a human." Elian slowly stood. "Who are you?" "My name is Rowan." His eyes sparkled kindly. "I have watched over this sanctuary since before your parents were born. You live here. I belong here." He glanced toward the Alpha King. "As they do." Elian looked around the glowing chamber once more. "I've never heard of this place." "Very few have." Rowan rested one weathered hand upon the ancient carvings. "The world forgot." His fingers traced the image of a human child sitting beside a wolf. "But the mountain remembers." The cubs hurried toward the old man without hesitation. He laughed softly as they rubbed against his legs. "You've grown since I last saw you." The smallest tried to climb into his lap despite being far too large now. For the first time since the battle, Elian found herself smiling. The sight warmed the cave more than any fire. Rowan looked toward her. "They've already chosen you." She blinked. "I don't understand." "They will." He nodded toward the Alpha King. "And so will he." The great black wolf slowly lowered himself onto the stone floor. His breathing had become heavier during the climb. The herbs had slowed the bleeding but could not erase the damage done by countless weapons. Rowan knelt beside him. His experienced hands carefully removed the bandages. He studied the wound for several moments. "Deep." His expression darkened. "But clean." He looked at Elian. "You saved his life." "I only did what anyone should." The old man smiled. "No." His gentle voice echoed softly through the cave. "You did what very few would." Silence settled once again. Outside, snowflakes drifted quietly across the cave entrance. The wolves gradually lay down around the chamber, forming a peaceful circle. Some rested. Others remained watchful. The cubs finally curled together beside the Alpha King. He lowered his massive head until it rested across all three tiny bodies. A father making certain his children remained close. Elian watched the moment quietly. Something deep inside her chest tightened. She had spent most of her life believing she stood alone in the world. Her parents had passed away years earlier. She had no brothers, no sisters, only her little cottage and the forest she loved. Yet somehow, inside this hidden sanctuary, among creatures everyone else feared, she felt less alone than she ever had. Rowan lit a small fire using dried cedar branches. Warm orange light danced across the crystal walls. He placed a simple iron pot above the flames and filled it with mountain herbs, wild mushrooms, and fresh spring water. Soon the comforting smell spread through the chamber. The wolves remained perfectly calm. Even the Alpha King closed his eyes, allowing himself the rare comfort of rest. While the soup slowly simmered, Rowan motioned for Elian to follow him deeper into the cave. They walked through a narrow passage until they reached another chamber. Unlike the first, this room held no fire. Only moonlight poured through a crack high above. At its center stood a single stone. Tall, smooth, older than memory itself. Its surface carried dozens of carved handprints. Human, wolf. Together, Rowan placed his palm against the ancient stone. This is where the first promise was made. His quiet voice seemed almost part of the mountain itself. The stories told in villages speak of a king saved by wolves. He smiled faintly. They only tell half the truth. Elian listened without speaking. The first human the wolves chose was not a king. She looked at him in surprise. No. Rowan slowly shook his head. She was a healer. Elian's breath caught. A young woman who carried no sword. The old guardian's eyes softened. Much like you. Outside, the wind sighed through the cliffs. The kingdoms did not yet exist. Winter had become so cruel that both wolves and humans were starving. Fear turned neighbors into enemies. He rested his hand on one of the carvings. One day, a wounded wolf wandered into a lonely valley. People chased it away. They feared it. They threw stones. They closed their doors. He smiled gently. One woman did not. Elian remained perfectly still. She fed the wolf the last food she owned. When spring finally came, that single act of mercy ended a war before it truly began. The wolves never forgot. The humans did. Rowan turned toward her. The promise was never about crowns. It was never about strength. It was never about blood. It was always about compassion. His words settled deep inside her heart. The memories of the battlefield returned. The frightened cubs. The falling arrows. The Alpha King's desperate roar. She had never acted because of prophecy. She had acted because frightened children needed someone. Nothing more. Nothing less. Rowan nodded as though hearing the thought she had never spoken. That is exactly why the promise recognized you. A distant howl echoed through the cave. Not one of warning. One of welcome. The old guardian looked toward the entrance. The mountain has accepted you. Elian lowered her eyes. I don't feel worthy. No one who truly is, ever does. They returned to the main chamber. The Alpha King had awakened. His golden eyes followed Elian as she approached. Gone was the suspicion that had filled them on the battlefield. Gone was the distance born from years of betrayal. Slowly, with visible effort, he rose to his feet. The wolves watched in silence. The great black wolf stepped toward her until only a single pace separated them. Then he did something Rowan had not witnessed in decades. The Alpha King lowered himself completely. His powerful front legs folded beneath him. His great head bowed before the young Omega healer. Not to a queen. Not to a ruler. To the woman who had protected his children when every warrior had failed. Elian's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to. The Alpha King gently lifted one massive paw and placed it over her small, bandaged hand. Warm. Steady. Trusting. The white cub bounded happily between them, wagging its tail before curling against Elian's legs. The other two quickly followed. Rowan smiled quietly beside the fire. The old promise lives again. For one peaceful evening, the mountains forgot the sound of war. But far beyond the snowy peaks, inside the towering walls of Frostmere Castle, the commander stood before the frightened royal council wearing armor still stained with battle. He lowered his head with carefully practiced sorrow. The Alpha King is dead, he announced. A wave of shocked whispers swept through the grand hall. The wolves turned savage. They slaughtered the royal guard. They carried away the king's body. He allowed silence to deepen before speaking once more. And they have kidnapped an innocent Omega healer. Many in the council covered their mouths in horror. Others clenched trembling fists. The commander slowly raised a blood-stained piece of the Alpha King's broken collar. I swear before the kingdom. His cold eyes hid a smile no one else could see. I will avenge them all. Outside the castle, church bells began to ring. Across Frostmere, people stopped their work. Shopkeepers lowered their heads. Children looked toward the mountains with frightened eyes. The first lies spread through the kingdom as quickly as winter wind. And before another sunrise, an entire nation would march toward the northern mountains, not knowing they had become soldiers in a war built upon a single terrible deception. Morning arrived quietly. A pale ribbon of sunlight slipped through the crack above the sacred cave, scattering across the crystal walls until thousands of tiny lights shimmered like stars caught inside the mountain. For the first time in many days, no sound of battle echoed through the valleys. Only the gentle trickle of the underground stream. The soft breathing of sleeping wolves. the crackle of cedar logs glowing inside the stone fire pit. Elian awoke slowly. The smallest wolf cub was curled against her side, its tiny paws twitching as it dreamed. The white cub had somehow climbed into her lap during the night, while the grey one rested with its head across her boots. She smiled before she even opened her eyes completely. Outside the cave, snow continued to fall in slow, silent flakes. The mountains looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Rowan was already awake. The old guardian stood near the entrance, watching the eastern sky with thoughtful eyes. "You slept," he said softly without turning around. "A little. You needed it." Elian wrapped her cloak around herself and stepped beside him. The cold mountain air stung her cheeks. Far below, hidden beneath layers of drifting mist, the forest stretched toward Frostmere like an endless sea of dark green. "It almost feels like the world has forgotten yesterday." Rowan sighed. "The mountains remember." His gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. "The kingdom does not." Before Elian could ask what he meant, a young grey wolf raced through the snow toward the cave. Its breathing came hard. Ice clung to its fur. It stopped before the Alpha King and lowered itself immediately. The great black wolf listened without making a sound. His golden eyes slowly narrowed. Rowan closed his own eyes. The lies have begun. Elian looked from one to the other. What happened? The commander reached the capital. Rowan's voice carried quiet sadness. He told the kingdom the wolves murdered their king. Elian's heart sank. "And me. He claims you were taken prisoner." She stared toward the distant castle she could not yet see. "My village. They believe you are either dead." Rowan paused. "Or waiting to be rescued." A cold silence settled between them. The commander had not merely stolen a throne. He had stolen the truth. By midday the sacred cave was alive with movement. More wolves arrived from distant valleys than Elian could count. Massive timber wolves from the western forests. Snow-white wolves from the highest peaks. Lean grey hunters from frozen rivers. Old wolves scarred by countless winters. Young wolves whose paws had barely reached adulthood. Each entered the sanctuary with quiet respect. Each bowed first before the elder guardian. Then before the Alpha King. Finally, each lowered its head toward Elian. The sight still embarrassed her. She stepped back every time. "They shouldn't bow to me." Rowan smiled gently. "They are not bowing to power. They're honoring mercy." She looked across the gathering. "I never wanted any of this." "I know. Then why me?" The old guardian rested both hands upon his wooden staff. "Because kindness never chooses itself." His words lingered in the still air. The mountain always waits for someone who protects another life before protecting their own. Elian lowered her eyes. She remembered the battlefield. She had not thought about prophecies, or kingdoms, or history. Only 3 frightened children. Perhaps that had been enough. The Alpha King recovered more quickly than Rowan expected. Every morning Elian replaced his bandages. She cleaned each wound with melted snow and healing herbs gathered from hidden ledges around the mountain. At first the great wolf remained perfectly still, watching every careful movement. Days passed. The distance between them slowly disappeared. One afternoon she struggled to reach a wound high along his shoulder. Without being asked, the Alpha King quietly lowered himself. His enormous body settled gently onto the stone floor, making her work easier. She laughed softly. "You really do understand." The great wolf blinked once. The smallest cub immediately copied him. Then the other 2 followed. 3 tiny wolves blinking in perfect unison. Elian laughed again. The sound echoed warmly through the crystal chamber. Even Rowan smiled into his tea. The mountains had not heard laughter for many years. Far below, Frostmere had become almost unrecognizable. Black banners hung from castle walls. The commander walked through the capital wearing dark ceremonial armor polished until it reflected the winter sun. Crowds lined the streets. Some cried openly. Others knelt as church bells rang above the rooftops. "My friends," the commander declared from the palace balcony, his voice carrying across the square. Our beloved king fell protecting this kingdom. The crowd lowered their heads. The wolves betrayed us. Angry murmurs spread like wildfire. They murdered our soldiers. They kidnapped innocent people. They now gather in the northern mountains to prepare another attack. He lifted the broken royal collar high above his head. I swear. His voice thundered through the city. I will destroy every last beast before another child suffers. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others raised hunting spears. Hatred spread faster than truth ever could. Inside the crowd stood an old shepherd. His weathered hands tightened around his wooden staff. He remembered something. Many winters earlier, he had watched a little girl kneel beside an injured raven while other children threw stones. That little girl had been Elian. He whispered to himself. No. His tired eyes filled with doubt. That child would never stand beside monsters. Around him, other villagers exchanged uncertain glances. Questions had begun to grow. Very small. Very quiet. But questions nonetheless. A week later, the first refugees reached the mountains. Not soldiers. Families. Old men. Women carrying infants beneath heavy blankets. Children shivering from the cold. They arrived exhausted after escaping villages where the commander's men had seized food, animals, and homes in the name of preparing for war. Elian ran to meet them. One little boy stumbled in the snow before reaching the cave. She caught him before he fell. It's all right. His frightened eyes widened. The wolves. They won't hurt you. The white cub trotted over and gently nudged the child's mitten with its nose. The boy froze. Then slowly, very slowly, he reached out. His tiny hand rested on the cub's soft head. The wolf licked his fingers. The child laughed. His mother burst into tears. One by one, fear began melting away. The wolves shared fresh meat from successful hunts. Mountain springs provided clear water. Elian treated frostbite. Rowan prepared warm soup each evening. The sacred cave slowly transformed. It no longer sheltered only wolves. It sheltered hope. Scouts returned with darker news. The commander has taken children from the border villages. Elian stopped grinding herbs. What? They're being held outside the capital. The Alpha King's ears flattened. The scout continued. He has sent messengers. Rowan unfolded the sealed parchment left at the cave entrance. His face hardened as he read. He demands surrender. Elian quietly took the letter. The message contained only a few lines. Come alone. Kneel before the people. Or the children die before sunset. The cave fell silent. The fire crackled softly. Nothing else moved. The commander had learned something dangerous. He had discovered exactly where Elian's greatest weakness lived. Not inside her body. Inside her heart. She folded the letter carefully. I have to go. No. Rowan's answer came immediately. It is a trap. I know. The moment you enter the city. He'll kill me. She looked toward the frightened refugee children sleeping near the fire. If I don't go, he'll kill them instead. The Alpha King rose. Though his wounds had nearly healed, several scars still crossed his dark coat. He stepped between Elian and the cave entrance, blocking the path. She looked into his golden eyes. I know. Tears gathered in her own. But I cannot ask someone else's child to pay the price for my safety. The Alpha King lowered his head. Not in agreement. In sorrow. The three cubs gathered around Elian's legs. The smallest whined softly. She knelt and stroked each tiny head. I'll come back. She hoped it was true. She truly did. But as the mountain wind carried distant church bells from the capital, even she could not be certain. The commander had prepared one final game. And before another sunset painted the snow red, Elian would have to choose once again between her own life and the lives of innocent children.